Let me tell you a story about my two clownfish. Hello everyone, ReeferGil here. In today's video, my clownfish will come back home into their new aquarium. They are my first additions into the system, just as they were my first additions in my 75-gallon reef tank 5 years ago. This marks yet another milestone achievement for my aquarium build. I'll tell you guys right now, no offer of money, trades for high-end corals, no nothing will ever separate me from these clownfish. I'm emotionally attached and you cannot put a price tag on that. A lot of you have been asking about my two clownfish, so I hope you enjoy the story of their journey. When I first got this pair of black and white ocellaris clownfish, they were so tiny I was afraid they were going to swim down the overflows. They would get whipped around by the circulation pumps and they fought hard to stay inside the protection of their anemone. Both of these clownfish came out of the same fish tank from my local fish store and were the same size. Their body color was more of an orangish blackish. They both took to the rose bubble tip anemone from day one, and from that day forward, they never ventured off more than a few inches away from it. Although the anemone wasn't huge at the time, I'd lose sight of these tiny little guys once they swam into the anemone. Over time, both started growing at about the same rate, but after a few months or so, it became obvious one was getting bigger than the other one. It was the bigger of the two that also became aggressive towards my fingers inside their tank. The orange coloration on their bodies faded away to the point it was just on their faces. But that also soon faded away after about a year. Before long, these two clownfish were dark black with contrasting bright solid white markings. At times, the white was so intense it actually has a blue sheen to it. Throughout their lives inside the 75-gallon tank, the two clownfish stuck together. As far as they were concerned, they were the only fish in the tank. It was just about them and their anemone. They were never harassed and never harassed any other fish. After about 4 years, both started to spawn on a regular basis. It seemed like they would spawn as soon as their last clutch of eggs hatched and became food for the entire tank. I did have intentions on trying to catch the fry and raise them, but it never worked out. Then, at around the 4.5-year mark, their lives got flipped upside down. They were evicted from their home and separated from their darling anemones who had provided them with protection ever since they were little babies. The clownfish, along with all the other livestock, was placed inside large tubs. They must have been so confused. For the first time since they could remember, they were in an unfamiliar environment. All they could do was stick next to a shriveled up anemone that was on the side of a small rock. But the trauma continued when I was forced to transport them to yet another unfamiliar world. I dropped off all my livestock at my local fish store as I prepared for this 100-gallon build. They were placed inside their tank, now separated from all the familiar fish they had gotten used to over the past years. Worst yet, there was no anemone inside the tank to give them the much needed hugs of security. As if things couldn't get any worse, one of the hottest heat waves to ever hit Central California happened the very next week. The local fish store's losses were overwhelming. We're just not built for long-lasting heat waves like this. I watched several of my fish die that week. Although I was upset over the losses, I have to admit, my attention was on my two clownfish. Their breathing was labored and I just wasn't sure they were going to pull through. Between the two of them, they must have found the strength and courage to live another day. Finally, after 4 days of intense 110-degree temperatures, the marine fog returned to the Bay Area. The temperatures dramatically dropped and slowly they started regaining their strength after a scary near-death experience. For the next 7 months, my two darling clownfish endured 4-year-olds tapping on the glass in an attempt to get a reaction from the clownfish. So many nets and unfamiliar hands swept by them as they saw their tank mates getting shoved into plastic bags filled with air and water. No more, my little clowns, no more. For the last time, my clownfish were removed from the local fish store and placed into their car seat. On the drive home, we chatted and caught up. We had a few laughs and answered a lot of each other's questions. They were really curious about their new home. And then his collection cup was totally full, and then he dumped it right back into the tank. Unbelievable. That's CJ's aquarium. Oh, that's so funny. Although I will be quarantining all new fish, I didn't want to add insult to injury by inferring my clowns were diseased fish. After a temperature and drip acclimation, they were placed directly into their new home. No, but on a serious note, I observed these fish for 7 months. That's like the longest quarantine period ever. There's absolutely no need to add them to yet another quarantine tank. The next thing to go into this tank will be a beautiful anemone that'll give the clownfish hugs all day long and embrace them under the anemone's protection. Until then, they can enjoy their big screen TV all to themselves. And that's the story of my two clownfish.